Brilliant. Thanks, Charlie. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for joining this afternoon. I'm really excited to be presenting you our lessons from delivering logistics innovation. It's all about micro consolidation today. Just a quick bit of background, hopefully by now you know, but an overview of Solent FTZ. We were awarded £28 million, £29 million of funding from the Department for Transport way back in 2019. And we are looking to deliver innovation in transport projects across two themes, personal mobility theme and the sustainable urban logistics, which is where I sit. So my role is around delivering our drones for medical logistics project, macro consolidation and micro consolidation. Solent Transport represents the 4 local authorities across the bottom as part of the Future Transport Zone, and I'll refer to that as the FTZ from this point forwards. And one of the critical elements of the Future Transport Zone, the FTZ, is about learning lessons, trying new things, and then disseminating those lessons out to other local authorities and our partners. So that's what today is all about. And I want to kind of start with the headlines really about micro consolidation and what did we learn. We found that a methodical approach to site selection is absolutely essential for a successful trial. Whether you like it or not, as a local authority officer, your time will be spent with property, legal and procurement. Logistics and property experts support success. And also finally, kind of a parting comment that a subsidised facility might entice operators. But first, just to kind of recap on micro consolidation and what it is, I think those of you joining today are probably familiar with it as a term, but there's lots of kind of different phrases out there: last mile deliveries, final mile deliveries. But what I'm talking about is a facility that has been constructed to consolidate deliveries from multiple vehicles, and then sorting them and putting them onto zero or low emission last mile vehicles such as cargo cycles. In the context nationally, I guess, against an ever increasing number of internet retail sales as a kind of total proportion of retail sales, that is generally kind of attributing to an increase in LGVs and vans across our cities and urban areas. And we're seeing that kind of replicated in the Solent as well. And as a local government, it's very difficult to address. I think unless you're looking at kind of road user charging, clean air zones, or kind of more specific booking systems for loading bays, it's a very difficult challenge to address. And so what we're trying to see is looking at innovative solutions such as micro consolidation. Is there a route in there to try and reduce congestion and therefore improve air quality and other kind of environmental benefits as well, and economic benefits to your city or area? So that's kind of generally, but specifically for our trials, what did we want to achieve? Well, we wanted to assess and simulate a potential micro consolidation locations in the Solent. We wanted to make sure that cargo cycles were used for that final mile of delivery. Critically, we wanted to make sure that the trial was viable beyond the end of the trial period. So we didn't just want to come in and do a trial and then kind of step away and the thing falls apart. We wanted to try and make sure that we set a sustainable kind of scheme up that could be financially viable in the long term. And then that bottom one, a big tick today, effectively communicate our learnings. The trials that we're delivering as part of the FTZ are focused in Winchester and Portsmouth. And before I get on to the 4 lessons I've said, I think having the kind of support from the local authorities at Winchester and Portsmouth specifically has been incredibly valuable, being able to help us navigate through the kind of internal mechanics of the local authorities. So back to our learnings. A methodical approach to site selection is essential. So we worked with the University of Portsmouth, one of our research partners, and the local authorities, as I've said, to develop a long list of potential locations. And here you're looking at Portsmouth specifically, and around 52 sites that were developed as part of a kind of desk-based study. And then that was whittled down to a short list, and those shortlisted locations were assessed through something called the multi-criteria scoring tool, which is a tool that was developed in collaboration with the local authorities by the University of Portsmouth. And that tool was really useful for us. What it did was take criteria such as availability of sites, the accessibility for parcel transfer, the availability of the site generally, planning considerations, cost, and other kind of factors around the operational use of it relevant to micro consolidation. And it applied a scoring to each of those locations. And that was, as you can see here, really kind of obvious in terms of which sites would perform well as a micro consolidation site and which wouldn't perform so well. I mean, I have to say each of those locations are great in their own right, but we're kind of thinking specifically about micro consolidation and how that site applies to that operation. And it was a super valuable tool because it allowed us to overcome challenges. So Cascade Shopping Centre in Portsmouth scored highest, and that was where we focused our energy. We looked at it as a privately owned shopping centre with plenty of usable space. There was only some minor works that would have been required to make it a micro consolidation hub. There would have been kind of ripping out of the old subway that was in there. And we were looking at a single operator to run around 850 parcels per day. We actually got some pre-application advice as well from the local authority that said, in principle, a change of use from retail to logistics use was acceptable. And so we started the process of a full planning application, which would have obviously been required to then move forwards as a logistics hub. And as we were doing that, unfortunately, due to the kind of commercial nature of the shopping centre, they had another tenant who was able to take that site. But importantly for us, we had the multi-criteria scoring tool. And what this had achieved for us is pre-briefing for councillors, senior managers, stakeholders on the list. That meant that as that site became unavailable, everyone was kind of familiar with the different sites that we were looking at, and it wasn't too much of a stretch to say, this Cascade Shopping Centre is no longer available, let's step down and have a look at the next one that scores highly. And it also meant that we had done a lot of the groundwork in terms of the requirements for each of the sites, and we had a kind of a head start on the stakeholders and what we might need to do to make it a viable hub. So we landed on Hillsea Industrial Estate, geographically different to the Cascade Shopping Centre, but so far it's proving a really good unit to use as a micro consolidation hub. And we appointed delivery mates to operate from there in May 2025, and they'll be operating for 12 months. I'm going to move on to our next learning. You might think this might be the driest one, but I think it's probably the most important. Your time as a local authority officer is going to be spent with property, legal and procurement. There's two kind of complicated and slightly varying contractual and legal structures here, and I don't want you to try and kind of get into the detail of this structure, but to step back and I guess appreciate the complexity of what we were trying to set out to do here. Solent Transport are not a legal entity in our own right. We have financial, legal and procurement support from our partner local authorities, which means that it can get complicated when delivering projects, but I think this is generally applicable to you as local authority officers as well. In Portsmouth, I think we're going to focus on, in terms of the legal aspects, it was a challenge for us because we needed to introduce a service contract for a trial management from our partners at Decarbon Logistics Solutions, who I'll come on to a little bit in a moment. But we also needed a concession contract for the logistics operator. And that's because we were subsidising the facility itself, and we were operating the facility in terms of the setup and the establishment of it. But in terms of the operation, we needed a logistics operator to come in and kind of independently operate that as a concession. And we wanted that logistics operator to have a data sharing agreement directly with the university to ensure that we got all of the monitoring and learnings back from the trial. In terms of property, again, it kind of sits in that complicated structure where we as a local authority and Solent Transport didn't want to hold that lease with the landlord, who in this case conveniently happens to be Portsmouth City Council. But that enabled us to kind of make the lease payments internally, but we didn't want to hold that lease agreement. The reason for that is because of that objective of wanting the trial to be sustainable in the long term beyond the FTZ. So when myself and my team step away from this, we wanted the trial to continue. And so we looked to our consultant agents to hold that lease agreement directly with Portsmouth City Council as the landlords, and then they would sublease that to the operator, who in this case is Delivery Mates. What I think this demonstrates is hopefully a simplification, although it's still slightly complicated. It's a much more straightforward kind of commercial transaction between the consultant agent, the commercial property team at Portsmouth, and then the sublease down to Delivery Mates, where Solent Transport are stepping away. But the University of Portsmouth, importantly, is still receiving the data because they have an independent data sharing agreement with Delivery Mates. And so between Solent Transport and Portsmouth, University of Portsmouth, we've agreed they'll be able to feed that information back to the department as the trial continues. It's a similar story in Winchester, really, in terms of the lease. We've actually taken a slightly different approach where Winchester granted a license to occupy, but we've gone with the same approach of having a consultant agent who is coordinating that role. And again, as we step away, that becomes much more straightforward. Moving on to our next learning, logistics and property experts support success. Now, this is, again, one of those kind of obvious learnings potentially, but for us, it was a real game changer in terms of getting a viable logistics hub established. We looked for expert trial management, and this was off the back of some learnings that we achieved from previous trials that had happened in London. So an organisation called Cross River Partnership had delivered similar trials in London, in central London, and I remember being at an event where the project manager there kind of said to me, "You really don't want to be kind of on a day-to-day operational oversight of this trial. You don't want to be the person that they phone up and say the locks aren't working. Can you come down and fix that for me?" As a local authority, you've got enough to do and not enough bandwidth to kind of deal with that stuff. So we really recommend that you have an expert in place that can manage the trial. And that's what we did. So we went out to market, and Decarbon Logistics were appointed as our consultant agents in Portsmouth, and they really helped with our feasibility assessment. So looking back at the multi-criteria scoring tool developed with the University of Portsmouth, they gave that kind of independent and logistical operational kind of audit, I guess, of that, and they were totally on board with what had been done and agreed that the locations that we'd chosen were kind of suitable. But then when it came to actually implementing the trial, they were able to then get in there and kind of really kick the tires of the site and help us with that setup. They were then also able to set the facilities up directly, so they would be managing contractors on our behalf. So we provided them the funding, and then they were subcontracting to whoever was required to set up that facility, for example, additional electrics and power, or sourcing battery charging cabinets. Importantly, they then will take on, or are taking on, the operational oversight of the trial. So they are basically the day-to-day contact for Delivery Mates in Portsmouth. And they'll also be kind of checking in time to time to make sure that the operation is adhering to those kind of standard operating procedures. The risk assessment methodology statements and things like that are all in place, and that fire safety assessments are all being adhered to. And so that's a really important step for us to have the assurance that the trial is performing as it should, and the operator is performing in accordance with the requirements, but also enabling us to kind of take a step back and focus on what we do as a local authority. And then finally, and importantly, again, for the FTZ kind of closing in December, is that decommissioning element. So Decarbon Logistics will support delivery mates in either decommissioning at the end of the tenancy, or there might be an option to extend that tenancy, and they'll work directly with that operator to make that happen. So either returning the facility back to how it was when we took it on, or carrying on the service independent of subsidy back to that kind of financially viable without subsidy desire. As I say, they're really supported us in terms of making sure that planning permission was secured, building control, building insurance was secured, and they did this by building on their kind of previous experiences in other trials. And this isn't a pitch for Decarbon Logistics directly, but I think just having that that kind of assurance that someone is in place making sure that these things happen is really important. And in our case, that's been super helpful in terms of getting the trials launched. Similarly, in Winchester, again, even more importantly, having someone on board to help set this up, because rather than just utilising an empty industrial unit, we're actually looking to construct or have constructed a totally new hub. So this is Winchester Friars Gate car park in the centre of Winchester, and Decarbon Logistics have supported us in setting up the facility that's converting 14 car parking spaces into viable logistics space. We've also included some office space. We've also got welfare facilities for the logistics operator, and there's similarly kind of battery charging cabinets, additional power supply, security, everything you would need for a viable logistics hub. And we've also got, or lucky enough to have the support from academic experts. So we're working with the University of Portsmouth and University of Southampton across the Future Transport Zone. And the University of Portsmouth in particular have been super helpful with micro consolidation. As I say, they supported us with the site selection work, but they've also got a role to play in terms of the monitoring and evaluation, where at the commencement of the trials, they have undertaken some simulation work. So looking at kind of key impacts in terms of economy, social, environmental performance indicators, and some data, provisional data and dummy data. They have developed a model that allows us to kind of understand what the potential benefits of our trial could be. And in Portsmouth, looking at delivering approximately 1,000 parcels per day, converting 2 first mile delivery vans into the hub onto 10 last mile cargo cycles. When compared with a traditional diesel vehicle, our hub in Portsmouth could achieve a reduction in costs by 3%, reduction in environmental costs by 93%, generate 95% less CO2. But really interestingly, what we found is that there is a potential to increase the social cost by 44%. Now, University of Portsmouth looked at this and kind of saw that it was a bit of an outlier potentially, and they identified that they think it's because it's based on the accident cycle rates generally in Portsmouth, rather than what would be a kind of a professional courier service. And so what we're hoping is that as the trial progresses and we get more data in terms of accident rates, then we'll be able to see that social costs reduce. But it just shows the value of having a pre-trial simulation and then being able to compare it to real life data, and then basically update that model that the University of Portsmouth are using, and then have a more robust model that you could apply to different situations in the future. And finally, our final lesson, a subsidised facility might entice operators. Price of logistics innovation in the Solent, just to give you an idea in terms of the budget before I move on to the kind of why I think it might entice operators, not necessarily definitely. So Winchester, we're looking at around £167,000, in Portsmouth £175,000 as it stands. So that's broken down into the kind of property costs, so rent and overheads, resource, so trial management, project management time, works costs. So you see Winchester is higher than Portsmouth, but that's because we've kind of created a brand new facility, whereas in Portsmouth we're retrofitting an existing facility. And so you can see that's a pretty substantial kind of amount of funding going towards this project in both cases. And I was under the assumption that my job was pretty easy. I would just come in and say, yep, here's the grant, operator, crack on. However, it's not the only consideration for an operator. For them, they need to have the assurance that there are customers and volume and basically a demand from the market for them to come in and operate their last mile logistics service. And it's quite difficult as a local authority to kind of throw subsidy at that. You really need the demand to be in place already, or you need to go out and kind of build that demand yourself, which is, as I say before, quite a limited opportunity for local authorities with lots of different projects and priorities going on. The courier also needs strategic alignment, so it might be that it's a location that's near to an existing operation for them, because they'll need to invest in additional assets like bikes, staff, management, riders, which is all kind of additional investment for them. So while we're subsidising the facility for the trial period and that trial management, there's kind of skin in the game for the logistics operator as well that they'll need to ensure aligns with their requirements. And they'll also need to commit to a minimum operating period. And in the logistics world, there is, it's always on a knife edge, I think, in terms of the demand. It can peak and trough with Christmas and other times of the year. So committing to what we hope is a 12-month trial, or what we've set out for a 12-month trial, it could put some operators off. But at the same time, it could provide a level of assurance to that operator that that facility is going to be available for 12 months. And then finally, a commitment to data sharing. Having that direct engagement from the University of Portsmouth with the operator has been really useful, and they've got their own data sharing agreement. As a logistics provider, the data that you collect is of value to you, and so you want to make sure that that is being shared appropriately. And so you need an operator that's willing to share that, and hopefully there's a trade-off by the fact that they get the facility and the subsidised element of that, but they also need to be willing to share their data. So I think that ends my kind of 4 key lessons from micro consolidation trials, and we'll hand back to Charlie and Sarah to kind of administer the question and answer session. I've got hopefully with us today Ed Cox from Decarbon Logistics, and potentially Andy Bullock from the University of Portsmouth as well, if there's any kind of direct questions that I'm not able to answer, but I'll do my best to field them, and I'm looking forward to interesting discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, well, as I said before, we're going to be making cameras and mics available now, so if people would like to turn their camera on and turn mics on in order to ask questions rather than putting them in the Q&A, they're more than welcome to. I've got a couple of questions, and we've got a first question from Pete Boostred, who asks, has there been a project cost for the revenue loss of the 14 car parking spaces required for the Winchester trial?
That's a really good question. So on the flip side of that, what we're doing as a project is actually paying for the cost of those car parking spaces. So those 14 spaces are in that property cost for Winchester, which is I think £35,000. So at the same time as us benefiting from having access to that space, we're also able to, I guess, secure the revenue for the local authority for those spaces. Particularly in Friarsgate Car Park, we did an assessment of the capacity of the car park, which was under capacity. And so again, it's kind of securing revenue for the local authority where potentially they might not have had that.
Thanks, Rob. I had a question about your multi-criteria scoring tool. Is that the sort of thing that would be available to other local authorities if they wanted to use it on their own project?
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. So we have developed that with the University of Portsmouth. it's certainly something that the university would be interested in talking to other local authorities about, in terms of how we developed it, what the criteria were specifically. And I would encourage local authorities either to reach out to me or us via Solent Transport to set up a conversation with the universities to see if it's something that could be applied in their area as well.
Thank you. Pete's got his hand up.
Yeah, thought I'd say something as opposed to putting in the chat. Yeah, thanks, Rob. Really interesting presentation. I suppose, what's the view in terms of then what the market's currently doing in terms of the logistics sector and in terms of that kind of micro logistics kind of model? Is there, are we getting any learnings from how this kind of disrupts or relates to what commercially the market's direction of travel is? Obviously, we're seeing maybe more sustainable electric vehicles operating in the urban environments, etc. But is there still a big gap there that we're trying to have to influence and step in to demonstrate a viable model, or do we see commercially it kind of moving in that direction? What's the view on that?
Yeah, good question, Pete. Thanks. I think I think the fact that we're doing this trial kind of indicates that there is still a need to demonstrate the value or the potential value of micro consolidation. I think that in terms of for us to try and appoint an operator, we've found that there's plenty of interest in the market in terms of what we want to achieve. But when it comes down to actually, I guess, committing operators to delivering this, my last slide kind of summarizes all the things that actually they think, well, hang on, we've got all of this to consider. Whilst you're providing the facility, making a change in our kind of process and situation is going to be costly to us. And so I think the general direction is kind of heading towards an increasing kind of sustainability with electric vans rather than diesel vans, and cargo cycles being utilized where they are being proven to be effective and efficient, rather than operators, I guess, taking a punt and trying out these trials. Whereas what we're doing is trying to, I guess, fill that gap of proving the business case, demonstrating the concept to them, and then hopefully an operator coming in, establishing a scheme in an area, and then using that to build on that customer base that we've supported them in gaining and expanding the scheme that way. So that's kind of my general take. I know I've got Ed from Decarbon Logistics on the call. You might be able to provide a kind of insight in terms of your experiences with how the market direction is heading.
Yeah, sure, Rob. Yeah, good to meet you all this afternoon. Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and one we get asked quite often. And I think it's something. It's fair to say probably that logistics probably hasn't changed much in 100 years. There's still elements of parcels being moved around in vehicles being brought into cities and towns. I think there is a bit of inertia across the sector where for some businesses, for a number of the businesses, the current model works for them, and that there's no real sort of drive for them to necessarily change. But you've got a lot of other pressures which are increasingly becoming evident, where it's getting harder for delivery vehicles to operate and delivery businesses to deliver in cities and towns. And it's when those pressures start to form that businesses are starting to look at how do they do things differently, in addition to the requirement to drive down CO2, the costs of driving around in cities, parking fines, low emission zones, pedestrianisation of areas. It all is sort of moving the sector in the direction that how we deliver in towns and cities does need to change. Now, there are some logistics businesses who are further along that transition than others. Some, for their model, they focus solely on electric vehicles. Some have tried or have adopted cargo bike deliveries in city centres, and these sort of pilots help sort of reinforce and determine what models work, what type of locations work, what type of setups work for cargo bike deliveries. But then there are also other models where delivery businesses are experimenting with parcel lockers to pick up and drop off. They're experimenting with containers, which are and containerization, which could be seen as the next sort of evolution beyond cargo bikes and micro consolidation, or indeed complementary. So, and there are businesses which focus solely on doing cargo bike deliveries as well, and there's been businesses who have made that model work, and some well publicized businesses that haven't. So I would probably say that it's certainly embryonic sort of model delivering on cargo bikes today, but it is the direction that the cities are moving into, and towns, and the forward-thinking logistics businesses we're working with are increasingly looking at how they're doing walking freight cargo bikes, EV vehicles, because things inevitably will be a crisis where there's access to real estate in these urban areas, and there's the need to deliver in a more sustainable way. And in order to do that, you need to be located close to your end users and your customers. So it's those three key areas sort of converging at the moment, and we see as being the opportunity over the next few years where these programs can really demonstrate how that can work.
Thanks, Ed. We've got a few more questions that are popping up in the Q&A section, but I'm going to go to Ian Wainwright, who's had his hand up and waited very patiently.
Thank you. Firstly, congratulations for actually pushing it through this far and not bashing your head against a brick wall, which certainly is what the planning I always suspected it might be, but it's been 10 times worse from what Rob said than I would even imagined. I think partly because of the complexity of it and understanding it. So just seeing it through to the end is a challenge in itself. So to be congratulated. I think a bit like if you take some of the projects that Crossover Partnership have done, things are often working as an individual. I think sometimes it's about how you actually scale these things up. Certainly there seems to be a lot of work on, understanding, as you said, the sort of the model beforehand. Just wondering on the cost side of things, one of the big problems I think is that it's often about the supply chain. So it's about where the warehouse is based. It's about where the delivery between the warehouse and potentially the customer comes. And the minute you split that into two journeys and handle it, there's an increase in costs. So just the 3% reduction of costs in the model looked really, really odd, because you're going from 2 van drivers to 10 cargo bikes, which is potentially, 4 or 5 riders doing a couple of trips. They've got to be paid. So who's paying them? Where's the trip coming from? And once the vans are electric, I'm wondering whether the environmental benefits are there, because effectively the 10 cargo bikes, if there's no separate cycle lanes, you're going to end up basically slowing down the rest of the traffic because you've got more vehicles on the road. So there's a series of things there which I think become subtleties, but might be interesting to see the practicalities against what the model says.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. That's again a good question, and I think demonstrates the importance of the approach we're taking, whereby, yeah, you're right. The pre-trial simulation is very much based on assumptions, and what we're hoping to achieve with these trials is actually gathering real data from a real trial, and then being able to look back at that simulation, see how far off we were. Andy at the University of Portsmouth will be getting reams of data from delivery mates, not just on where the cargo bikes are going, but actually where the parcels have come from, what the kind of comparison to what they otherwise might have done would be. And then in terms of your kind of electric vans point, again, that's exactly right. But then that's where that falls into the to Ed's point about more potentially restrictions or more barriers to operators operating vans generally, whether they're diesel or electric, in city centres and cargo cycles, kind of offering a chance here. So I think in answer to your question, I don't know the specifics of the modelling, but what I would say is that the purpose of the trial is to get that real life data, look back at that, and kind of update it from that point.
Because even things like the trials for a limited, will be for a limited time, of the year, then you potentially got higher turnover of riders and things with the bikes. And University of Southampton involved in the freight traffic control project a few years ago, which basically identified how efficient a regular driver was as opposed to somebody who didn't know the route, basically taking twice as long and things like that. So I think that's something that will need to be thought about as well, but that hopefully will come out of the comparison of the data and stuff, because those sorts of things I think make trials potentially more costly than real life, but who knows.
Yeah,
Thanks.
just to add, sorry if I just to add to that, Ian, I think it's a great point. And in addition to the University of Portsmouth work, we've also been sort of modelling some of our own comparisons with vans versus cargo bikes versus containers, and there definitely needs to be under the right circumstances, delivering cargo bikes on a pence per parcel method, we can demonstrate that is cheaper than delivering it on vans, up to a third cheaper in some instances, and even greater if you're delivering parcels via, say, like walking freight or containers and other things like that. But there is certainly a cost which probably people don't appreciate, where there would be impacts further up their supply chain into their depots and having parcels sorted and ready to be delivered down into a micro hub. And there is certainly the need in some instances to sort of handle that parcel an additional time, other than having it collected in a diesel van on the edge of the city and have it driven round. But all in costs, when you factor in the cost of the vehicle, the cost of the driver, the cost of stationary time in traffic, cost of the entering low emission zones, and other factors, as well as having parcels which, if they're failed delivery, they've got to be taken back out of the city, back to the sorting hub, and then re-delivered again, using a consolidation centre which is close to the customers on a cargo bike, can, under the right circumstances, provide a significant saving pence per parcel to operators. But that is what these type of trials are to
and
evidence.
it depends on sort of how you cut it, because there's some work been going on in London looking at St Martin's Lane, which Westminster City Council looking to pedestrianise, and there's like a 4-hour delivery window which the big trucks stick to. It's safer because there's not people around. What's happening in the afternoon, there's cargo bikes, there's vans, it's chaos. And sort of like DPD were in a meeting last week, and they were just saying this is just crazy because we can't actually deliver efficiently because there's so many other people around. And parcels are still sort of 15% of the volume of freight that's coming in. So all of those things I think need to play into the overall picture, rather than just trying to isolate parcels, because some of this is about how do we improve the overall, I think, as well. So
thanks both. We're going to go.
It's good data. Good data.
We're going to go to some more questions in the Q&A. But I think it sounds like there's possibly opportunities for tangential conversations to happen following the Q&A as well. So we're going to go to Andrew Bramwell's question now. You mentioned delivery of parcels in quotation marks. Is there scope to explore more complicated delivery, for example, refrigeration? He's interested to understand how far this could go.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I suppose the point of our trials is to look at the kind of complications of implementation of a micro logistics hub. In terms of what is then delivered by the operator, we are kind of leaving that up to the demand of the customer and what that operator is able to provide And so I think in most cases that's generally kind of parcel volume. I think there will be an additional cost and probably some technological barriers to things like refrigeration, although I could be corrected on that, I think. But I think for our trial specifically, we're probably looking at the kind of traditional parcel, something that could fit into an e-cargo cycle, which are not just kind of cargo cycles with the pack on the front, but it's a relatively large vehicle, pedal assisted, so that kind of reduces the demand for the weight and things like that. And then I know that there's that rear container, I guess, could be adapted. Again, I don't know the specifics of the technology, but I can see Ed nodding to the fact that he's probably got something up his sleeve that could manage some refrigerated cargo.
Yeah, that's right, Rob. You're right that there are operators out there. Cool Run is one that comes to mind, who precisely do that. They do sort of cargo bike and sort of pod container transportation of refrigerated goods. I think it would need to understand some of the parameters around like what goods, what sort of temperature control sort of requirements there are, that sort of thing. But there are operators out there who do specialize in that. And incidentally, some of the refrigeration, depending on how long the goods need to be transported for, enhanced sort of insulated cargo bike boxes are sufficient to do that last mile sort of delivery part. But there's definitely possibility, but it's something which would be interesting to look into more.
And just to kind of add to that, I think you would be constrained, I guess, by the facilities requirements. So in terms of planning permission, what you're able to actually work within there. I'm kind of thinking more along the lines of like dangerous goods and things like that. But then if you had refrigerated cargo cycles, I imagine you'd need kind of more power and more charging capability and things like that. So it would also depend on the kind of facility itself and the constraints there.
Yeah, I would say so. Depends if the goods are stopping in the consolidation hub for any length of time, I suppose. If it's coming on a refrigerated vehicle to then be delivered in the last mile, then relatively low impact. But yes, if any of the goods are expected to be stored on site in the hub, then yeah, there would need to be some additional power requirements, I would suggest.
Thanks both. We'll go to the next question, which is from Guy Dorrell. What process was used to generate demand for the operator? Were the local authorities and universities involved, or were delivery mates alone responsible for that?
Yeah, great question. We kind of purposefully in Portsmouth, a part of our requirement for the operators was they generate their own customers and their own volume. We, as I suppose, quite frankly, didn't have the bandwidth to be able to drum up business for an operator, and so we were very kind of honest and clear at the outset that we needed an operator to come in and generate volume. That's not to say that it's not something that we are going to support and are looking at the moment. I know delivery mates in Portsmouth are actually kind of independently kind of looking at opportunities with public sector. We're also looking at opportunities to kind of help drum up business, essentially. Universities, NHS, other public sector organisations, and local authorities ourselves, I think, is an opportunity in Portsmouth, Winchester, and generally to kind of make use of these facilities. And there is research by University of Portsmouth and University of Southampton that's kind of available on our website and in academic papers around how the public sector could look to adopt kind of consolidation, look to adopt joint procurement activities, and then utilising consolidation centres like this as well. So I guess in short, we ask the operator to kind of provide their own customers and volume. But another learning, I guess, that could be on this presentation is that additional support from local authorities in identifying customers and securing some volume for them would probably give them a lot more assurance and willingness to commit to an operation.
Thank you. Next question is from Ian Saunders. It's about what type of data is being shared between the operator and the university. So you showed that on your diagram about a data sharing agreement. Rob, what kind of data is being shared?
Yeah, so I won't go into specifics. As I say, that's kind of part of the data sharing agreement between them. But we asked for an operator to provide, in general terms, things like the cargo cycle routing, costs of deliveries, volume of parcels, as much as possible, really, to inform the University of Portsmouth's modelling. And as I say, it was looking at the wider kind of impacts environmentally, socially, economically, not just necessarily on like emissions and things like that. So they're looking at a wide breadth of data, as much as the operators are willing to share, really, and then going to be working on that in terms of their modelling and updating that, and then passing that back to us as a kind of synthesized report.
Thank you. I had a question about your pre-trial simulation. It feels like that's quite a valuable exercise to undertake prior to starting the trial, so that you can you've got some benchmarking data, but you can also give an indication to stakeholders, senior management, etc., about the value or not that a trial in practice actually provides. That was done in collaboration with the University of Portsmouth. Is that specific to the university? Is it a tool that would be available to other local authorities? How does that kind of pre-trial simulation process work?
I think similar to the multi-criteria scoring tool, it's something that has been developed by the University of Portsmouth and their team in their kind of logistics and mathematics department. Sorry, Andy, if I don't know exactly the department, but that team have developed their own model. And I think the aim is that, as I say, as part of our trials, to inform that model with our data, that could then become a tool that could be applied to other locations and other areas across the country, really. And so again, I would encourage people to reach out to me directly so that I can set up a conversation with the University of Portsmouth on both the scoring tool and our kind of experiences with that, but also the model, the simulation model that they're running, and of course to look out for when the trial ends, the kind of dissemination of the findings of the final model runs versus the simulation, to see how that compares.
I've seen Andy appear. I suspect he may have something to add. I just wanted to ask, just for clarity, when can people expect the kind of final trial reports for micro consolidation? I know it's a bit later than some of our other projects. Yeah,
unfortunately, due to the kind of delays in us establishing the trials, logistics, particularly vulnerable to the likes of COVID and Brexit and things like that, means that we're slightly behind some of our other trial projects in the FTZ. So University of Portsmouth will be kind of managing that directly, supported by the local authorities, Portsmouth and Winchester, feeding that back to the DFT kind of mid next year, and then it will be kind of down to the Department for Transport to disseminate that.
Andy, did you have anything else that you wanted to add?
Thanks, Charles. No, I think the only thing, just off the back of what Rob has explained, is that yeah, all along, obviously, as University of Portsmouth, we've been involved in a number of stages, from trying to work up a business as usual freight network using data that's out there already, or data that we've purchased, to get a picture of what's already happening in freight, through to site selection, through to simulation, and of course now the monitoring and evaluation of the actual trials. All the way through that, we've been developing what we call a simulation platform to try to see what does that look like as a tool for local authorities to hopefully engage with, that's in a user-friendly way, in an online way. So we have got something kind of developed now, but it's certainly just like a prototype idea, that is in no way looking to be made public at this stage, but just to kind of use as a workshop. I think, Rob, is what we've been talking about, probably early part of next year. as we come to the end of our part of M&E. And we'd love to work with or demonstrate it to local authority officers, just so you can see the process we've been going through at each stage, but B, have a little play with, if you're going to identify a location for a site, what would it look like in terms of the routing and the numbers that get generated out of that. So it does have that level of sophistication at least. So yeah, we are developing that.
Thanks, Andy. We've got 9 minutes left before we bring this session to a close. There are other questions. Guy, go ahead.
It's more of a comment and suggestion, really, but I'm sure everyone on the call is aware that the cargo bike is a somewhat catch-all term for a variety of designs of bits of kit, and you have the kind of the delivery mates mums, which look something akin to a golf buggy, if you like, and you have other ones which are the front-loaded ones that were used previously by the pedal me's and Zedifies of this world, which possibly have a slightly lower weight capacity. I think they go to about 150 kilos. The ones with a big box on the back can often do double that. They do have the advantage of being able to filter through traffic, I think, in a way that the wider ones don't. So if there are any other sort of future, it's a great piece of work, by the way, really impressed. If there are sort of future surveys of this kind, I think it would be really interesting to compare the efficiencies of the two designs, if you like, for different types of cargo, because I think you would find that the two-wheelers were much quicker, but probably needed to reload more frequently than the other ones. So it'll be swings and roundabouts in that respect, I guess.
Yeah, thanks, guys. An interesting comment, and I think the beauty of working on the FTZ, and I always kind of say I think I've got one of the best jobs in transport with the flexibility that we're able to do with our trials, is to look at kind of questions exactly like that. I think with, let's say, our delivery mates operation, one of the things that we'll be kind of learning from them is how their bikes are actually navigating around the city. Is it a cycle infrastructure question? Is it a bike that you're actually using question? Is there a better kind of combination of those two things? Can we use our learnings to talk to our local authority partners and kind of perhaps suggest improvements that could then perhaps lead to greater kind of ability or capacity for those larger cargo cycles? Or where might they not work, and where do people not want them to work because it's very much more of a kind of pedestrian space? So yeah, we're kind of interested in all those questions as part of this trial.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, Ian Saunders has made a comment in the chat about the importance of cycle infrastructure and its impact on those kind of parameters that you're discussing. Doesn't appear that we've got any more questions in the Q&A. I'll offer this up as a final opportunity if anyone who wants to ask a question in person. Speak now or forever hold your peace, as they say.